saw the pain on his face. I was talking to him, trying to calm him down in the ambulance.
I was dead for a few moments, and until they did CPR and revived me, I really didn't know what was happening.
You're married one day to one person. The next day, you're married. That's somebody else. That's how drastic a devastating accident changes the person.
You work in a demanding and challenging environment. A workplace where skills and experience, know-how and planning all come together. And whatever trade you have, whether you're operating heavy equipment or using ladders and handheld tools, whatever you do on a construction site, most of the time you're working with and around electricity.
Hello, I'm Bill Shields. This video has a very simple purpose: to help you work safely around power lines. We'll be talking about both overhead and underground lines. We'll review the basics of construction site safety, and we'll discuss special concerns for those of you working with cranes and heavy equipment.
Nearly every day in the United States, someone dies on the job because of contact with electricity. Many more workers are injured. Electrical accidents change people's lives forever. Real people, people like John Fugara.
I'll never know. I'll live the rest of my life not knowing if he was trying to prove something to me, or if he just completely misunderstood.
In 1992, John's crew was putting up steel beams for a building annex. John operated the crane. His brother-in-law, Danny, was his spotter and ground rigger, attaching the steel beams to the crane. A high-voltage line ran right by the job site.
I yelled 4 or 5 times and pointed at the power lines, how close are we, how close are we? Don't put me within 15 feet.
It appears that Danny signaled the crane much too close to the power line. When he grabbed the cable to attach the steel beam, he was electrocuted.
I still have nightmares. There's nights that's all I see is the pain on his face. Like I said, I was looking right at him. Nobody else saw that. I did. To see a kid that I loved, that I treated like a son, die in front of my eyes, those scars will never heal. You've got to have safety in your heart. You've got to have it in your mind. Not just, oh yeah, we'll be safe. You've got to think safe all the time. There's just two ways about it.
John offers very good advice from a life-changing experience. So, what are some of the things that you can do to protect yourself and your coworkers from having an accident? First, understand how electricity works and how it could hurt you. Electricity from power lines will take every possible path to the ground. It travels through conductors such as metal, like this aluminum ladder, or wood, like this wooden paint roller, even water.
The human body, which after all is itself some 70% water, makes an excellent conductor of electricity.
So what does this mean for you? Well, if you or your equipment comes in contact with a power line while you're grounded, the electricity will travel right through you. You and anyone else who is touching you or your equipment could be killed or seriously burned. The best way to protect yourself? Learn where the power lines are and keep your distance. Now that we know how electricity works and how it can hurt you, let's take a look at some of the safety precautions we should take when working around underground power lines.
Just beneath our feet is a maze of wires, pipes, and cables. That means you must make sure you know what's below the surface of a construction site before work begins. If you plan to move earth in any way, make sure to call your local one-call or underground utility locator service well in advance. They will arrange to mark the location of underground power lines and other utilities so you can keep your distance and work safely.
Notification timeframes, response times, and penalties vary from state to state.
In addition to calling, use your common sense. Look out for buildings with no visible electric service and ask property owners if they have installed any private underground facilities.
Because underground power lines aren't visible, they can surprise you. Ask Cliff Meidel.
I was jackhammering around some telephone lines where I was trying to remove some of the concrete underneath these lines so we can go ahead and run a water line over top of the telephone lines.
At age 20, Cliff had been working as a plumber's apprentice. One day on the job, the jackhammer he was using hit an underground power line, and thousands of volts of electricity surged through his body.
At that time, the lights went out. I had a cardiac arrest, and apparently I was dead for a few moments until the paramedics had revived me and done CPR on me. The following days were kind of grim for me and things because for about 3 weeks, they were contemplating amputating both of my legs.
Cliff Meidel not only survived an electrical accident, he became an Olympic athlete, competing as a member of the American kayak team at the 1996 Games. The accomplishment capped 10 years of recovery.
The major injuries were to my legs. I had approximately a third of the knee joint that was burned away on the left leg and on the right leg, and then I had various exit wounds on my back, and 2 of my toes got blown off on my right foot, and then on the back of my head I had some exit wounds also.
It took Cliff 2 years to learn to walk again. His story is a reminder to all of us to work safely near power lines.
Overhead lines are obviously more visible than those underground. Still, accidents happen far too often.
Whether you're working with small or large equipment, before starting every job, look out for overhead power lines, poles, and guy wires, including those that might be hidden by trees or buildings. Remember, conditions can easily change, so survey the site every day. At your pre-work briefing, remind coworkers about nearby lines and other electrical facilities. When you identify overhead lines that may be a particular problem, mark a safety clearance boundary that will help warn everyone to keep all tools and equipment at least 10 feet away. Federal law requires at least a 10-foot clearance around high voltage lines. Power lines carrying more than 50,000 volts require clearances greater than 10 feet. The higher the voltage, the larger the clearance. Contact your local electric utility for specific safety information. And call your utility to see if safety arrangements can be made if you need to work closer than 10 feet from lines. Speaking of overhead power lines, always consider all lines to be energized and potentially dangerous no matter what they look like. It's most obvious with high voltage power lines because they are typically bare wire with no insulation.
Even other power lines, such as these that go from utility poles to buildings and appear insulated, are not designed to protect you from shock. In fact, every year, people are killed and injured from service drop wires just like this.
That's why it's important for roofers, carpenters, painters, and anyone else working near any power line to make sure they keep clear by at least 10 feet, or the consequences can be devastating.
I just could not get my hand free from that wire.
It has been a bitter lesson to learn for Dean and Ellen Meringue.
I've dropped pounds of coffee on these electric can openers trying to open them with one hand. But this flesh here is the muscle off the side of my leg.
Dean's moment of carelessness contacting an overhead power line has cost the Meringues a lifetime of pain and anguish.
It's been a long, long, long battle. It's a strange thing, that's electricity. You can't forget about it.
And no matter how hard I try, I can't make Dean into what Dean was before the accident. If you don't want to live the rest of your life in a nightmare from which you are never going to awake, don't cut any corners.
When you work with heavy equipment such as a crane or a backhoe, special safety rules apply when you're working around overhead lines.
If you're the equipment operator, it's difficult for you to accurately judge the distance between your equipment and power lines. To prevent power line contacts, designate a spotter whose only responsibility is to keep you a safe distance from lines.
Charlie, you're getting close to the power lines. Stop, boom it up.
Spotters on the ground have a much better vantage point. The person who is guiding a load is in the greatest danger of shock if there is contact with a power line. Your coworkers on the ground depend on you to keep them safe. Your spotter is the key player in your team effort to work safely around overhead lines. Someday, despite your best efforts to stay safe, you may be operating heavy equipment that contacts a power line. What should you do? First, calmly assess the situation. In almost every case, it's best to sit tight and wait for rescue workers because the ground nearby may be electrified.
Whoa, stay back. You might get hurt. Why don't you call 911 and the utility?
Warn others to stay away. Anyone who touches the equipment can be shocked, burned, or killed. Some electrical accidents may result in a fire like this.
But what happens if fire or other danger means you cannot stay on the equipment? Well, you jump clear, but remember, never touch the equipment and the ground at the same time. You can get away safely if you move very slowly, taking small, shuffling steps, always keeping both feet on the ground. Or you can hop away on 2 feet if you can keep your feet together so that they hit the ground at the same time.
If you try to run or walk away, your feet will bridge 2 areas of different electrical potential, and you can be killed or badly shocked.
Consider the equipment energized and dangerous until utility workers say it's safe. Now let's review the main things you need to know to work safely around power lines.
Call your underground utility locator service before you dig. Locate overhead lines and mark a safety clearance boundary. At your pre-work briefing, warn coworkers about nearby electrical facilities. If you operate heavy equipment near power lines, use a spotter.
We all know what it's like to work in the real workplace. Time is money, and there's a rush to get the job done. Let's face it, there's a temptation to let some of the safety precautions slide, but don't do it. Take the time to put safety first. Take the advice of John Fragara.
You've got to watch out for yourself. You've got to watch out for the man next to you. And you've got to make sure the man next to you watches out for yourself and watches out for you. I mean, it's just not talk. I mean, you've got to live it.